Hello there and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you guys are doing well. I hope that you're staying safe as always and everything is rosy wherever you are listening to this show around the world. We're in a bit of an interlull, no race this weekend, so we thought we'd take the opportunity to do something a little bit different. We've always said we've always wanted to engage with you, lovely lot, a little bit more than perhaps that we do at the moment. We can only apologise about that from the past. So what we're doing today is we've presented you guys with an opportunity to submit your questions, a bit of a Q&A, if you like, regarding the F1 2023 season so far, some of the things that you've picked up on, some things you'd like us to give our responses to and react to, and we're going to do our best to roll off some of the questions that you lovely lot have sent in to us and see if this is something that we can do on a regular basis. Perhaps when we have interlull weekends where there's no race, we could every so often answer some of these questions as the season goes on. Joining me on the episode, as always, the DNF1 panel in full force. We have Courtney Pine and Lee Wallington. And Lee, I want to come to you first because we have a little bit of a correction to do. On the last episode, I know we were going with this, you know where I'm going with this. On the last episode, we recorded not long after the Saudi race was done. Now, we knew there was a bit of a controversy hanging over Fernando Alonso's result and the post-race penalty that was being debated late on in the race, whether he was going to get it or not. When we recorded the episode, it was announced that Fernando had been given a 10-second time penalty for for the team failing to administer the 5-second penalty that he was supposed to serve in the pit lane during the safety car earlier in the race. According to the FIA, according to the stewards, if you like, that was not done properly. And Fernando was given a 10-second time penalty, which demoted him down to P4, promoted George Russell onto the podium. A few hours after, inconveniently for us, after we'd finished recording, with the impression that that had all been done and dusted, there was an appeals process going on with Aston Martin, where they had put forward an argument that they had done what they were supposed to do with the penalty under the regulations, and the appeal was upheld. Fernando's penalty was removed, he regained P3, he was back on the podium. So, of course, a lot of you listening in, assuming it was a bit later on in the week than it would have been, Monday after the race or even Sunday night if you were listening to it when it first went out on the audio platforms, you guys would have listened to that and thought, hold on, do these guys know that the result has been overturned? So we did know, it was just unfortunate timing, and at that point we'd already made the episode, so we apologise, we did put disclaimers out there. This is where it comes to Lee, however, where we need to make a correction, and this is what was regarding the pre-race predictions. Lee, you predicted top three, just for clarity, for those of you that didn't listen to our preview episode before the Saudi race, you went with Perez to win, Verstappen second, Alonso third. Perez was your bold prediction, you went with Max to get pole position, so instead of getting 3 points out of the possible 6, I believe, you got 5 out of 6 because you get 2 points for your bold prediction. So well done. Very impressive prediction. How do you feel, Lee? Top of the table.
Well, I'm feeling very happy right now. But when the race finished, I was like, yeah, I actually got my bold prediction gone through. And it actually happened the way I predicted. I got to admit, I wasn't sure how confident I was. But then obviously the Ferrari with the Alonso, and I thought, there goes that prediction, part of the prediction. But no, thank you. I accept your apology. I accept the FIA's apology, and I'd like to thank everyone. It was I feel very happy with
Well, it was
that.
Oscar
Let's hope
weekend.
I can repeat it more than one weekend, and it wasn't a fluke.
That's it, yeah. And well, it was Oscar weekend recently. We haven't got one to give to you, so we'll just have to move on with that one for the time being. But guys, of course, whilst we brought that up, I do want to talk about this situation with the FIA. Now, from what I understand, when they were dissecting the details to how the events unfolded and why it took so long to give Fernando Alonso a penalty, when Esteban Ocon, who'd committed the same offence according to the stewards, was given a penalty very swiftly in that Bahrain race. Now, the logic behind it was when the stewards were timing Fernando Alonso to make sure, when it was all being conducted during the pit stop, at the time, there was no foul play or no reason to suggest that there was any problem at play. So they carried on with the race as normal. Fernando was doing Fernando things, doing a solid job to get a podium behind the Red Bulls. About 10 laps or so, before the end of the race, where we got that very cryptic message from Mercedes to George Russell that Fernando might be getting another time penalty, and it kind of confused everybody. Not even the broadcasters were even aware of what was going on. At that point, a individual report had been sent over to the stewards to say that Fernando Alonso may have not served his time penalty correctly, i.e. mechanics may have touched the car. And this is regarding the jacks on the car. Long story short, the appeal from Aston Martin after this penalty was given post-race, and that was why it was given so late on, Aston Martin claimed that in the regulations, in terms of touching the car for a 5-second time penalty, because of how the jacks work in getting the car moved up and down and stuff like that, it only references the front jack. It doesn't reference the rear one. And Aston Martin claimed, well, what's the difference? A jack's a jack. It shouldn't matter where it's positioned on the car. It's still performing the same function. So if you're going to make an exemption for that, you should make an exemption for this. And we could all see the rear jack was touching the rear of the car. So that was the logic of their appeal. It was pretty much a loophole, I think, in the regulation. So the FIA have obviously had to react very quickly to try and clarify the situation. But overall, you know, as brilliant as it is for Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso to keep their podium, which I think they thoroughly deserved, and Mercedes and George Russell obviously acknowledged that for the short period that they thought they had gotten that result. Once again, we've got a scenario where it feels that the regulations aren't as watertight as the FIA or the stewards would hope them to be. And it feels to me, even in 2023, we're still seeing scenarios where despite the FIA and F1 and the stewards saying, okay, we're going to be more transparent, we're going to be more concise, we're going to make the show better, where there's less controversy on our part, we're going to referee this properly. It feels sometimes that perhaps what is needed is for them to have a very thorough examination of their rules and regulations, like F1 did when they changed the technical regulations to eliminate loopholes on these current cars. The FIA need to do something similar, because these things seem to be happening on a almost weekly basis right now.
Yeah, look, I'll be honest. I'll be blunt. I give up with the FIA. It just seems to be one mess up after another. It only took them 2 races to make a blunder, so congratulations to them for that. It also opens up Abu Dhabi. Every time the FIA make a mistake, it takes you back to Abu Dhabi and all the people that are still hurt from it, regardless of what your opinions are on their reactions. It all resurfaces again, and I just don't understand how these people are in such a position of power, and still almost 2 years later, they're still making these decisions that could, define the outcome of a championship battle. Like, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, Mercedes or Ferrari catch up with Aston Martin and they're battling for second. These points could make the difference at the end of the season. And I am sick to death of us sort of having race results or towards the end of the race, and there seems to be a divine intervention by the FIA. And it's like, well, what's the point of sometimes watching a race? It's like going to a football game and going, oh yeah, my team won 2-1. And then you leave the ground and you're halfway back home on the tube, and then you check on your phone and they go, actually, VAR intervened an hour after the match, said, that the equaliser was legal, and you find out your team has dropped 2 points. It's just becoming it's continued to be a circus. And in a time where I have other reservations about where F1 is going, about becoming more attractive to the general audience, there's still issues for the FIA to sort out before the general audience sticks, because I have no doubt that a lot of the F1 lost a lot of casual fans after what happened in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, that's true. And, we often talk about the FIA in such a regard where they sometimes do need to pull their finger out and actually forensically look at these regulations and try to clear up any examples of where things can be misinterpreted or loopholes can be found or certain scenarios like this can be prevented. As I said already, F1 and Ross Brawn in particular, with Patrick Head's assistance, they devised the 2022 regulations that we're currently enjoying right now to such a degree that they were almost considered prescriptive, and that if they weren't within the spirit of the sport or the regulations or how they were intended, things can be clarified and cleared up and new things can be written in, or it can be just sort of tightened up a little bit to prevent scenarios where a team can get away with something that wasn't completely intended from the rules when they were written. I feel like the FIA need to do something similar. And there are people in place that have experience of working in F1 to such a degree where they can find these issues. Very intelligent people can find these issues and, you know, create a set of regulations where we don't end up with a scenario where someone driving along with a podium could potentially be at risk of having that taken away from him, and then after an appeal, it given back to him all in the space of several hours, rather than what we saw in Bahrain was quite simply, oh, well, they touched Ocon's car, they didn't serve the penalty properly, 10-second time penalty, there you go, you move on. And it can affect so many people's races afterwards. So it is a shame. Hopefully they've learned the lesson, they can clear this up, and hopefully we don't find any more anytime soon. We'll have to wait and see. Let's move on, of course, to the main point of this episode. And as I said already, this is going to be a bit of a Q&A on F1 so far in 2023. We're going to react to some of your questions and give our answers and responses based on your observations of the season so far. Before we do get into that, however, as always, just want to take this opportunity, guys, to ask you, if you can, to like the video if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and if you're listening to us on your favourite audio podcasting platform, don't forget to give us a 5-star review. It really helps us out and it provides us with an opportunity to expand the show, keep doing what we're doing, and reach so many more lovely people like yourself listening to the show. So thank you very, very much. Of course, if you give us a 5-star review, we will give you a shout out on the next episode. And indeed, we do have a 5-star review to shout out and be proud of from our very good friend Dave Doherty. And hi Dave, hope you're well, mate. He gave us a 5-star review on Spotify, absolutely loves the show and enjoys what we do, and he really enjoys what we do. I feel like I said that twice. Well, I'm going to say it twice. 5-star reviews makes me excited to say that twice. So Dave, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave,
for your support.
You, Dave.
And guys, of course, if you want to shout out on the show, then give us a 5-star review. Very, very simple. On your favorite podcasting app, just hit the star, hit 5 stars. Leave some feedback if you can. Of course, if you can't and you need to let us know, just send us a screenshot. Our DMs are open. Just let us know on our social medias. They are highlighted in the show notes. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can show your support as well in that regard. Now, guys, Q&A time. We asked you guys to submit your questions to us. We are going to read through we did get quite a few, which is quite nice, and we really appreciate that. So we're going to do as many as we can. We may have to do subsequent episodes of this sort of thing in the future, so plenty of opportunities, if you didn't get to ask us a question, to do so in the future. And there's going to be plenty of talking points this season. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about. So we will start with the first one. Funny enough, Dave Doherty also sent us a question. So I'm going to start with Dave, seeing as he gave us a 5-star review. And he asked us, do you think the current ATR regulations and the cost cap will close the field enough to allow all of the teams a fair chance at fighting for the championship? Who wants to have a go at that one first?
Lee, seeing as I took over the Alonso rant, the stage is yours.
Well, that's very nice of you. So, in my opinion, I think in theory it should enable the field to close up. Obviously, as a midfield, I think this, at least in recent memory, this has probably been the closest midfield we've had outside the top one team, really. I mean, I think if you look at Saudi Arabia, I believe the if you ignore Red Bull, the field spread was within a second, which you may see at circuits like Monaco, where obviously it condenses the field, but in a fast track like Saudi Arabia, that's quite a small spread between all the teams. So you can see it is working in that aspect. The real question is obviously the number one team that has the best car, being Red Bull, and enabling the rest of the grid to catch up to Red Bull. In theory, as I said, that should work. And obviously we do have the unknown of what's going to happen with Red Bull regarding their penalty from their last year breaking the cost cap. We don't know how much it's going to impact the team. It may have no impact at all. It may completely hinder Red Bull, like Christian Horner has been saying, that they're going to lose half a second worth of development, and they're really afraid that they're going to obviously lose their advantage. No team wants to lose their advantage.
Yeah.
So we have to wait and see on that.
Can I jump in?
Yep.
Yeah, go for it, mate.
Red Bull have nothing to worry about, seeing as they're almost looks like 1.5 seconds clear of everyone else. So it might take the other teams about 3 or 4 years to catch up rather than 5.
Yeah, I mean, the gaps does seem to get bigger and bigger and bigger depending on who you ask, where they're just literally asking that question over again and they're just repeating. It's always a different answer to different people depending on who you ask. As I said, you're always going to hear rhetoric and you're always going to hear these things. I mean, I actually think the regulations are actually having an effect already. I think the field spread is closer than it was. Based on what we saw last season, we had the top 2 teams in Ferrari and Red Bull. Mercedes were challenging them more towards the end of the season, so they obviously caught up, and you could argue part of that was owing to the development curve that Mercedes were able to go on and the fact that Mercedes were a lot better at developing their car than Ferrari were, and to a degree Red Bull, you could argue as well. Depends on who you ask on that one. But then you had a midfield of Alpine, McLaren, and other teams in there, Aston Martin, that were challenging them too, Alfa Romeo, Haas were there or thereabouts for a while, AlphaTauri not so much. And then you had Williams dead last on their own. And Williams would often be a thorn in the side of the midfield, but there were days when Williams were just in a completely different category and not a good one. And this year, going forward, there isn't one team right now that is straggling behind or struggling to such a degree where they don't look like they belong with the rest of the field. Williams have caught up massively and made gains. Everybody's made gains to different degrees, some more impressive than others. And now we have Aston Martin, who's jumped from P6 to now being the legitimate title challenger to Red Bull, as unrealistic as that probably is, given how good Red Bull are. But I think it shows these regulations are having an effect. This isn't a case of Lawrence Stroll being able to throw unlimited sums of money, as he probably would have liked to have done at this team, and expect it to become a championship winning team. He's aware of the process. And I think Aston Martin have done a phenomenal job over the course of the last 15 months or so to now have a car which is better than almost every team on the grid. And their resources are relatively humble compared to what Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull have, for example. So I think it goes to show that it is having an effect. Will it allow every team a chance to fight for the championship? Probably not, as much as Ross Brawn in his wildest dreams would like for it to. I don't think that's realistic. I think we get to a point in these regulations, assuming they work as intended, where the field spread will be closed up to a point where more teams will be challenging for the big prizes over the course of the season. But I think we'll have a regulation reset, and then we may see that pecking order reset itself again, and then we just repeat the process, or it just gets closed up even more. We'll have to see. But I do think it is having an effect. The cost cap, I think we haven't really talked about the cost cap too much on this one, so I think we'll mention that. It's too early to say, really. We had the incident with Red Bull last season, but I think that was a fact-finding mission, quite frankly. And,
I can't wait to see who's broken the cost cap this year. I can't wait.
Well, I mean, we'll have to wait and see. I think it was very, very good financially that we only had one team breaching on a financial basis. But again, and there were 1 or 2 procedural breaches, which obviously weren't as big, but they are still important. Most of the teams did stick to the cost cap, despite the difficult situations that a lot of them found themselves in, and obviously others were hindered more than others as a result. So I think it's early to say with the cost cap. I think we need to give that one time to sort of settle itself. I think everybody knows where the boundaries are of what you can get away with, what you can't get away with. Red Bull played a big part in establishing that, I think, considering the arguments that they made as to why they felt they were within the cap. And we'll have to wait and see if that actually does produce something.
I do want to add on the cost cap, Adam, is most, if not all the teams, obviously I don't know the financial teams, have said that they're meeting or close to meeting the cost cap, including teams that you wouldn't have thought were meeting the cost cap, like Haas, like Alfa Romeo. I don't know about Williams. But the ones that you in the past haven't had the financial resources, and even if, as you said, we find that the cost cap doesn't work, it enables them to fund their development in the ATR. Obviously, if they use it completely to get the advantage, is a different matter. But it shows you how the state of the sport overall has improved. That the teams have become more viable. You have to look at 10 years ago, or probably a bit more than that now, that we lost Marussia, we lost Caterham, What was the third? I can't even remember the other.
Yeah, there were
team
three
that-
teams, weren't
Yeah,
there?
I can't
joining?
even
Was it
remember the third team.
2009?
Was that Hispania? Was it
yeah,
Marussia or yeah?
There were
And
Marussia and Caterham. There was the third team. I can't remember.
was it Hispania?
Might have been.
It might have been.
Was it the team that Kroom Chandok drove for?
Yeah, and Danny Ricciardo as well.
Danny
many
Ricciardo.
years ago. Yes, where he got started.
But
Yeah,
they all folded at different times, because they just couldn't fund to go racing. And obviously, which shows you how far the sport's come. That we've got
Agreed.
healthy teams that can afford to go racing. They may not afford to go to win the championship or fight for a championship, but they can afford to go racing. And in that sense, I think the cost cap has worked.
yeah,
So I just wanted to add that bit on.
No, I think that's fair. If funny enough, it actually leads us into our next question, which is quite interesting. So we got Twist LH44. Wonder who they support. If Red Bull breach the cost cap again in 2022, what kind of punishment do you think that they will receive? Well, that's an interesting one because
does that include sandwiches?
Well, I think
catering.
I think if they've just breached the cost cap in terms of overspend like they did last season, that's pretty much regardless of what it's for. Because this is an interesting dynamic, and I watched the recent series of Drive to Survive, and they did put a focus on this. And the argument at the time that was, refreshed in my memory was Red Bull talking about catering, and they're talking about costs that weren't really relevant to the production of the car or nothing that made the car go faster. And then, of course, on the other side of the coin, you've got Otmar Schaffner and Zach Brown that were leading this mostly, along with Toto Wolff and Mattia Binotto, that, it doesn't matter how much you're over the limit. In F1, regulations are always adhered to so strictly to the point where they're governed in that way, where if your car is 0.1 of a millimeter over some set of regulations, the car gets disqualified. It's not allowed to race, regardless of whether it provides a performance benefit or not. And we have seen that in recent times with Sir Lewis Hamilton in Brazil in 2021, obviously disqualified from qualifying because of his the gap in the DRS of his rear wing and stuff like that. And we've seen that in the past. Anyone who's watched Rush will know about the story of James Hunt and Niki Lauda and James Hunt's McLaren that was, in violation of the regulations, and they had to rebuild their whole car and play catch up. So, there is an argument to be made there. What kind of punishment do you think that Red Bull, I say will receive? I don't want to say should, because we're not the FIA, we're not the ones, but it would be a second breach in a row. And last year was fact-finding, as we established already in 2021. I think they got the benefit of the doubt in regards to their punishment for that. This year, if they do it again, probably wouldn't be as forgiving as they were last year.
In all honesty, I think they'll just get another light punishment. This is just me. My views don't reflect the other people on the panel, and I'm sure I'll have the same old suspects saying, "Oh, Mercedes." But I just get the impression that Christian Horner is a master of the political games in Formula One. He hasn't stopped moaning since 2014. Attempts were made time and time again to slow Mercedes down. He eventually got what he wanted in 2021, and I think he got Red Bull out of it. I feel that he has a bigger political persuasion compared to some of the other teams, and I think it's just because of the demeanor and the ability that he has to spin things in his favour. This isn't, me attacking Christian personally. I have to give credit where credit's due. I think he's very, very good at turning the regulations and the rules in the favour of Red Bull.
So what penalty do you think that they would receive if they breach the cost cap again?
Probably similar to last year, which probably won't really affect their car the following season.
Fair enough. Lee, what about you? What punishment do you think that Red Bull would receive if they breached the cost cap again in 2022?
Part of me hates to agree that I think it's very likely if Red Bull did breach it, they will just get a slap on the wrist. But I would like to think as a repeat offender, the FIA would punish severely and throw the book at Red Bull about the harsh punishment dished out. Obviously, there's the serious breach and the light breach. So if there was a breach, it would depend on if it's a serious or a minor breach. More than likely, it would be another minor breach, not a serious breach. But even then, a minor breach, I think within the rules, it was still in the capacity of deducting points and although I don't think it could pull a championship.
Well, it would be for the season before, and
Yeah, maybe for 22, wouldn't it?
it would be pointless. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
agree.
But even
You'll
if
be able
it's
to flatter them.
even if it's a pointless thing that they've deducted 100 points from Red Bull and Max, for me it's not it's the purpose that you need to throw the rules and just reinforce the point that there is no team greater than the rule set, and if they are found to be repeat offenders, regardless of how much they've gone over, it should be full capacity of the rules. I mean, that's my opinion. But we have to wait and see. That we may be saying this, and Red Bull have done nothing wrong last year, and they learned a lesson on how to manage their finances. But
yeah,
we have to wait and see.
Well, you'd certainly hope so. I mean, last year they were quite well before the tax credits were applied. They were quite overspent on the budget cap, and that actually did him a favour when it was bringing the total down. I think the FIA will be much stricter on it this year. I think we've had the benefit of the doubt. We've had the clarification. Red Bull got a fairly severe punishment under the circumstances, even though it doesn't look like it's going to affect them so much for this year. The hope is that it might affect them a little bit more going forward. But if it happens again, and to a similar degree, talking about minor and major breaches, I mean, I think, as Zach Brown and Otmar Jaffner pointed out, I think a breach is a breach, regardless of whether it's £1 or if it's £1 million, quite frankly. Every other team had to follow it. I'm not going to go through the sob stories of what people had to do because, everyone was in the same boat in that regard. And I felt like they were just doing that to play that political game as well, as you mentioned, Courtney, on the other side. I think the FIA will be much stricter, and I think there is a genuine threat that they will potentially consider taking away a championship from Red Bull for 2022. Even though, as you said, Lee, a points penalty could be a fairly sufficient punishment, it does literally no damage. Max Verstappen, if you took 50 points off of him, it doesn't matter. He still wins the world championship. I don't think Sergio Perez would care if you took 50 points on him to say instead of coming third, you're going to come seventh. I don't think he really cares, really. Red Bull won't care about the Constructors' Championship points deficit because they had a massive one. So I do think in order to make sure that people follow this cost cap, you have to be serious about this. You've had your chance to sort of play around with the rules now. If it happens again, I think they have to be firm. And I'm not saying it just because if this is Red Bull, this is the question that was given to us. If any team breaches the cost cap, then obviously for other teams, it's going to have to be a different kind of punishment. You can't take a championship off of Haas because they don't have one to take, or Ferrari, if you like, they don't have one to take. So there you go. Just so I'm being fair.
It wouldn't surprise me if we did see some kind of petty retaliation from some of the other teams, and then I'll see, well, let's see if we get a light punishment the way that Red Bull, because we know how petty these teams can be. So don't be surprised to see, I don't know, maybe I've just got a funny feeling it might be Mercedes this year. I've got a funny feeling.
Maybe. But then I suppose it depends on the team. What punishment can you give to them? As I said, you can't take away a championship from Mercedes for a year that they didn't win one.
Yeah.
So I think, as I said, we're talking about Red Bull, the world champions, and obviously a lot of people were upset about what happened in 2021 because, they'd won a title in that way. And if it happens in 2022, the other team's obviously going to be even more angry, especially given the advantage that they've been able to carry over into this season and maximise. So it's an interesting question. But of course, guys, let me know your comments in the if you're watching this on YouTube. Let me know your thoughts on some of these questions that we answer as well. I'd love to get your feedback on this one. Let's move on to the next one. And again, this is another Red Bull one, actually, regarding Checo and Max from Vettel fan 1994. If Checo and Max are close in this season's title fight heading into the summer break, at what point will the team get involved and prioritise one driver? I mean,
I don't think they will. Look, I'm the first to criticise Red Bull. I think I made it clear in this episode. But I don't feel they have a reason to benefit a driver given the performance advantage that they have. If they were in a tight championship battle, then of course they would favour Max. I think we all would. I think we can all agree that Max is an exceptionally good driver. And in that circumstance, we would all pick Max. So if Red Bull have this kind of advantage and we expect the championship to be done and dusted by the summer break, why would you intervene? It's like there is always a possibility that they will favour Max. I do, again, going into the political side, I do feel Max has the people around him, like his dad in particular. God, his dad looked like his world had crumbled down because his son finished second the other night. So I do, and we've seen it. We saw glimpses of it last season. I think it could be more pressure from the people around Max rather than Max himself.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, to be fair to Jos Verstappen, and we kind of made fun and poked fun at this in the review, there was a moment where Checo and Jos did have a bit of an embrace. They did shake hands, and, there was some level of respect paid to each other in that regard. I don't think either of them are going to forget about what happened last year in Brazil. I'm pretty certain Jos has not forgotten that, hence why he wasn't very happy about how things went down that weekend. But I do think that's a good point, Corny. I think Max is not necessarily the person that's bothered that much, but, when push comes to shove, we will potentially see something happen between the two to try and, if there is a championship fight really going on between the two, to try and assert dominance. So it will be interesting. Lee, what do you reckon? I mean, do Red Bull really have a choice in this? Because I almost feel like it could be inevitable that if this title fight does progress between these two, and hopefully it does, because I think that would be quite entertaining, Red Bull are going to have to get involved one way or the other. And if they do, I can only really see it going one way, unless the championship is somehow lopsided in Perez's favour to a point where they can't really hold him back.
It is a tough one. I do agree, Courtney, that I think the Max's entourage, or the people around Max, whatever you want to call them, will be applying a lot more pressure to Max than the Sergio's entourage. But if you look back on Red Bull history, yes, they haven't been in a two-way title fight for a long time. But I believe it was 2010 where the Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel were in the championship fight whole season, and even to the last race. Obviously, until the Korean GP, Mark was even leading the championship when he crashed out. And so they didn't interfere in that title fight. And that was a three-way title fight, theoretically, 3 teams, not drivers. So they could have, yes, there was the preferential treatment that Mark accused of favouring Sebastian throughout the season, but Mark still kept himself there. There was no team orders in the sense of you can't go racing. Even after, I think, was it 2010 was the Turkish GP collision where Sebastian hit Mark?
That was glorious.
So they do have the history of letting their drivers race if they're both in the championship fight. But the thing is, that was 13 years ago. That was different drivers, different entourages. And obviously, do want to also highlight the fact that Dietrich Mateschitz is no longer around either, which is obviously an important part. He liked to go racing as well. So the whole dynamic has changed. But obviously, if there's going to be a choice, it's going to land only one way unless reliability favours Sergio over Max, or Sergio steps up. I'm not going to say he can't. But into the summer break, I would like to think they're still letting them race if it's a close championship fight.
Can I say one thing? Because it literally come to my mind, like, as you were talking there, Lee. You know how Red Bull have this OP DRS sort of system, a loophole in a regulation they seem to have found. If Max and Checo are close on pace in a race, we could be seeing quite a lot of overtaking between the two drivers, because if they're able to stay close enough with that OP DRS, it would be an easier overtake compared to, it would be between, I don't know if it was like between Leclerc and Sainz. It'd be a lot easier for Max to overtake Checo, or vice versa. So if we have some close races between the two Red Bull drivers, we could get some entertaining races from that.
Certainly hope so. For what it's worth, Red Bull at that time handled that situation a lot better than Mercedes did by comparison with Rosberg and Hamilton over the 3 years, particularly 2016, I think is an outlier. In fairness to Mercedes, those Red Bull battles did tend to sort themselves out sooner rather than later, and Sebastian did eventually assert himself over Mark in that team. I think 2012 was a great season for Mark Webber, but after the Korean Grand Prix where he had that, was it reliability problem or did he make a mistake or something? But after that race,
Mark crashed out.
yeah,
in
he
Green
crashed out,
PB.
and he was
It was
leading
a
the
wet
championship,
race.
wasn't he? Yeah. And then obviously at that point, Seb's form improved. Fernando at Ferrari was just doing a great job, and it became a 2-horse race very, very quickly. And Lewis Hamilton was obviously there as well, but that did start to fall away a bit towards the end of the season. So, yeah, I think if Red Bull are going to prioritise anyone, it's obviously going to be Max. I think the scenario will be if they're anywhere near each other in this championship. And we saw this last year in Spain where they were quite close together. They did swap those cars around, that allowed Max to win. And if they'd left it alone and Checo had won, they'd have been level on points in the championship. So I think Checo's going to have to... I think we're going to get to a point with these two, and we're seeing it already technically in Jeddah, where we saw Max sort of ignore the team's instructions to stick to a certain pace, and then he went and did the fastest lap to Checo's surprise, where he thought he was... And he said to him, like, weren't you told to hold pace? And Max like, well, yeah, but then I just did a fastest lap at the end. And Checo was a bit annoyed about it. These things are going to happen. I think Checo's just going to get to that point where he's like, you know what? I'm just going to have to manage my own race. And because that's what Max is going to do. We saw that with Seb. We saw that with Mark. We saw that with Lewis. We saw it with Nico. Prost, Senna, Lauda, Prost, whatever you want. It's going to happen. And, Checo's going to have to get them elbows out because Max has played this game and he's very, very good at it. And he knows what to do to win championships. He's already got 2 and he'll probably have plenty more. Let's move on. No one can accuse us of being Mercedes British bias fans on this because we've had a lot of Red Bull questions, and I think we'll do one more, seeing as you brought up an interesting point, Corny, because and this is a rather quicker one. You mentioned about Red Bull's pace and will the FIA get involved, and Torch16N got put a question in on that topic. He mentioned, is Red Bull's form right now a concern for the FIA and F1, considering the amount of effort and time they dedicated to these rules and regulations for these new cars to make racing closer and to create a more competitive championship? It seems to be a concern, and other teams have cited this, that Red Bull are already as dominant as what Mercedes were in 2020 and even 2014. As a result, do you think the FIA will intervene with a potential rule change with the ambition or intention, if you like, to slow Red Bull down and make it more competitive at the front end? I'm just going to say, yeah, I think it's a big concern for the FIA right now. And drivers have already talked about this. Leclerc and Sainz have mentioned how good that Red Bull is right now and that they just can't seem to have an answer for them. Mercedes in the past have said this about Red Bull in 2022. They've said it again in 2023. Hamilton and Russell's already written off the championship as far as anyone else is concerned that isn't in a Red Bull. Hamilton has said that this car is so dominant, it's so fast. He said it was a second faster, 1.5 seconds faster. You can change the time depending on who you ask, really. But it doesn't take a genius to know or see there is a bit of a political play going on with the drivers and teams here. Obviously, they want to exaggerate Red Bull's margin of advantage to such a degree, probably don't even have to, given how good Red Bull are at the moment, that right now, unless something is done to change that, Red Bull could dominate not only this season, but years to come, because the gap to catch them will just be too big, no matter how much Red Bull is sanctioned with development time. So I don't really think FIA and F1 have a choice. If they want a competitive championship for the next 3 years, and we kind of lost that the second half of last season, we're not going to get it this year, I think they're going to have to do something about it. And it's not the first time they've done it either, is it?
It all goes back to this conflict of interest, and I've raised it various times during our time recording, Adam. You've got the fact that it's the pinnacle of motorsport, the engineering side of it. Like, we need to appreciate these innovations and the way these guys are able to get an advantage. I honestly, despite the things I've raised about Red Bull in the past, I really do have the utmost respect for Adrian Newey. I think the guy is absolutely amazing, and he's just done so much for the world of motorsport, and even obviously for the British perspective, I think we need to be proud of what this guy has done for motorsport. But it's also a sport, and the entertainment value of it. F1 have done so much into bringing more casual fans into the sport. Now, if you talk to Joe Bloggs from down the road, down the pub and go, you're going to watch the F1 on Sunday, you know what they're going to say? No, because we know who's going to win. And before the same old suspects again jump in and go, oh, you didn't see people complaining when Mercedes were dominating. Yes, you did. There were loads of people complaining, and you understand why. Unless it's your team that's winning all the time, it's not going to be enjoyable, because even though for us, we're going to watch regardless. We're deeply in love with the sport. We love the engineering aspect of it. We enjoy seeing the battles in the midfield. But for the casual fans who F1 are trying to get more involved in the sport, they're not going to tune in knowing that it's either going to be one or two drivers winning every race.
Well, do you remember the French Grand Prix in 2020? I mean,
exactly.
If you sat through that, you can sit through anything.
But see, this is the thing. So if you have looked back on certain seasons, so during the Mercedes dominance, you probably say you remember 2014 because of how close that was. Obviously 2016. But you won't hear people talking about 2020 other than Mercedes fans. Mercedes fans loved it, but no one else did. There was a little bit of, I think some people kind of let it go a little bit in 2020 because obviously we were just happy to see action during the pandemic. But if that wasn't during the pandemic time, I think there would have been much more fuss made about the Mercedes dominance. And let's not forget, Red Bull were the first team to stage a protest against the DAS system. They wanted to get Mercedes disqualified from the Austrian Grand Prix because of the DAS system. They failed, but they eventually got what they wanted. They got the DAS system outlawed, and they also got a reg change with ride height that benefited the Red Bull. So I'd find it very interesting if the FIA were to intervene. I'd be very interested to see Christian Horner's reaction, because he had plenty to say during Mercedes dominance.
What do you reckon, Lee? Do you reckon the FIA and F1 will get involved to try and curb Red Bull's advantage?
I do think the FIA will be involved. The team, as you already said, the teams and drivers, apart from the Red Bull teams and drivers, will already be building their case, and we already mentioned that some like Lewis is very good at already saying the right things to be building that impression. That has already started, and I'm sure Red Bull has already started the defense, saying that we're not that far ahead, that we haven't done anything wrong. That has already started. We may not be seeing it as fans, or that is already going on. But behind the scenes, that is already started. And then you also think from Formula One as the entity, as Courtney said, they've done so much effort to make it more entertaining, more enticing, building the fan base, especially as Courtney said again, the casual fan base. And then you have a dominating team that will go and ruin it all. We were blessed with a very entertaining championship in 21, and they drove up the interest in the sport massively. That is what Formula One, the corporation, the entity, not the FA, wants. They want entertaining, close, fighting, action-packed, drama, intense, bam. A team running off, it's not going to deliver that. So even then, they're going to be pushing the FA to look, you've got to do something. You're going to have to. So a lot of conversation. If it's going to be this year, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised that you may see something towards after the summer break. Like the floor changed last year after the summer break, so we may see something then. But more likely, it will be next year. They force something through for the start of next year. But definitely, I reckon the FA will be amending some regulations somewhere or another. And Mercedes and Ferrari will be saying, do it this way because it will help us. Do it this way, it will help us. And it will land somewhere in the middle. Wait, mate, she helped Red Bull in the end after all. Actually, Red Bull go faster. Like it blew up in Mercedes' face last year when the ride height or the floor has changed.
I mean, I've just had a brainwave. I know how we can make this fair and interesting. So if Red Bull breach the cost cap again in 2022, I think the ultimate punishment, don't take away their championships. Forget what I said earlier, guys. Don't take away their championships. Red Bull fans rejoicing here, but wait for it. There's more. Ferrari will have to produce 2 new cars for 2024. If Red Bull breach the cost cap again, they have to drive the other car. Ferrari have to make one for themselves and one for Red Bull, and Red Bull have to drive that car.
Oh wow, that
That's
is
a
the ultimate punishment.
Is that not a fair punishment? I think that's fair.
I think intellectual property will come in the equation.
No. But this is the thing. This is the thing. They're allowed all of the intellectual property, and they can develop it in any way that they want. And they have to pay Ferrari the amount Ferrari spent on making the new car themselves. So all in the interest of fairness.
That's harsh. I wouldn't even do that to my worst enemy.
I have to suffer this. Why can't they?
Share it.
Just
well,
make
at least
it
this
heavy.
season. Sorry, Lee.
No, I was just gonna say they make the car heavy. They make it made out of gold and bricks in the back.
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. Do you remember?
Just get the bill up.
Yeah.
At least this season you're not alone. You've got me and Lee to join you in the suffering. You've got some company.
Yeah, I might have to get a Red Bull fan on, or better yet, an Aston Martin fan on. Someone that can actually be quite happy at the moment. So I need to find some more optimism on this podcast. But no, let me know, guys. What do you think? If Red Bull breach the cap again, they should drive the 2024 Ferrari. I think that's a fair punishment. Let me know. Let's move on from the Red Bull portion of this Q&A, because we spent a lot of time on this.
Get so much abuse in the comments.
Well, it's not my fault. The questions that came in, most of them were about Red Bull. They're the highlight right now. They're the marquee. So of course we're going to get questions on them. I'm going to move on to another topic, and I'm going to move to Aston Martin. A nice simple one from Leslie Mitchell. Hi, Leslie. Thanks for your question. She wrote in and asked, can Alonso win a title with Aston Martin before 2026? Yes, I think is the short answer. I think they can. Do you not think so, Paul?
I don't, and I know we say we're going to talk about Red Bull anymore, but I think Red Bull have got it in lock until 2026. You can see how I feel about F1 at the moment. No. They've got it in lock. They've got. I nearly broke my laptop. Then they've got it in lock until 2026. I'd love to see Aston Martin up there. I really would. I reckon they'll challenge. I think they can challenge, but I don't think they'll win.
I think the logic and why I think they can win is down to what they've done over the last 15 months, particularly over the winter break. They very quickly realised that they needed to try and make a better car. They needed to try and find the blueprint or what car was going to work. They did this before with Mercedes and they made a very good car out of it. They did it with Red Bull, legally this time. They made a very, very good car out of it. I just feel, and I'm hoping that with these regulations the way they are, that it provides opportunity for teams to close up despite the means that they might have, assuming they have enough to make a good car, of course. You know, we're not going to go crazy and say, oh, Williams are going to challenge for a championship by 2026. I mean, I think a lot more has to be done there for that to happen. But I've noticed how much Aston Martin have closed, even on Red Bull. As good as Red Bull are, there's an obvious deficit that has been closed between the two. Not a massive amount, but enough to suggest to me that it is possible that Red Bull, despite the huge gains they made over the winter, they may be close to reaching the ceiling of this concept. Now, it might be a better concept than everything else that we've seen, but if it is the case where Red Bull are quite close to reaching the peak of this concept, or the gains are going to be much harder to find, there is more scope for Aston Martin, with the growing resources that they will have over the next few years, to close that gap. If you still have Fernando Alonso driving to the level that he is right now in a few years' time, I could see a championship challenge happening in 2025, maybe, before 2026. So I'm going to stick my neck out there and say they can. Doesn't mean to say that they will, but I think there is some encouragement there. I think it's too early to suggest that Red Bull are going to dominate every single year, even though at this point in time, they look pretty good in that position to do that. So, yeah, I'm going to preach optimism here. Lee, what do you reckon? Can Alonso win a title with Aston Martin before 2026?
I think he can. I do agree, Adam.
Yes. There we go.
As per the previous question about FIA changing rules, there's always that aspect that Red Bull do actually get pegged back, and Aston Martin is the second fastest car currently. They're in the best position to take advantage of that. And obviously, they've got all the talks about Mercedes and Ferrari changing their concepts. Aston Martin are further along that concept than Mercedes and Ferrari. Aston Martin, they're getting their new wind tunnel. Is it next year they get their wind tunnel?
I think so, because they're already sort of moving into the new factory soon as well.
But they're getting their new wind tunnel. They get all their new resources. They've done some brilliant hiring and poaching from Red Bull, from Mercedes, from Ferrari. When all that knowledge that comes with them, so it's not just like Red Bull hired 15 years for Mercedes and
Well,
you make a really good Mercedes, you've
Yeah.
got 3 different families of engineers coming in and contributing on a
That's a
Red
really
Bull
good point.
concept that's already ahead of Mercedes and Ferrari. So Aston Martin could be in the best place to capitalize on any holding back of Red Bull, or best place to catch up to Red Bull. So there is a good possibility that they can, Fernando can win a championship. As again, if he will, is a different matter, but I definitely think he can.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've often cited in the past, mostly with Ferrari, that if Fernando was driving the 2017 or 2018 car, he may have won a world championship, where Seb Vettel obviously came up short for different reasons. And as well, Aston Martin built that 2023 car using the Mercedes wind tunnel. So there's absolutely no reason why they can't, develop something when they've got better resources or their own resources that they'll have more time to use and more understanding of them to build something that could be capable. As I said, they're not going to be able to do that by building a mimic Red Bull from the season before, because Red Bull obviously going to have that development time ahead of them. But for all the reasons we just mentioned, it is possible, but certainly not a guarantee.
We did also forget to mention, Adam, that is Fernando. So that's already an extra point on the...
I think we all just want to see Verstappen versus Alonso. In close machinery. We all want to see that. Chuck Hamilton and Leclerc in there, and even Norris to a degree as well with Russell. Oh, we'll just, give everybody the same car. Let everybody drive the Red Bull, and then we'll see where we go. But I know we don't want a same spec series, but sometimes it would be fun just to sort of play devil's advocate and say, but who would win if everybody drove the same car? Same way that we do with F2 and F3. We always have the best drivers shine through. Who would win if F1 adopted that approach? Let's move on to another question. And it's based on Mercedes and Ferrari. There's been a lot of talk about those two and their car concepts. We've heard stories about potentially Mercedes abandoning their current work and working on a new car for 2024, something similar to what we saw with Red Bull. Ferrari recently, I think Motorsport Italy, I think Lee, you shared this with us actually earlier, that they are very strongly considering moving to a Red Bull type concept for 2024. If they both decide to do that, give up on 2023, focus on 2024, do you think they have the means to catch and beat Red Bull in 2024 at their own game?
Oof, that's a tough one. I think that's it.
I think Mercedes do. Ferrari don't. Yeah. I do not. And look, Ferrari fans, I'm not bashing them because they're my own team and it's easy for me to do that. But I think when you look at the development curve over the course of the season, Ferrari are very, very good at building a car on day one. But having a fast car on at the end of the season is a different thing. And I think even if Ferrari turned up in 2024, took that Red Bull car, reverse engineer it within the rules, of course, and did everything possible to make a great car like they did in 2022, we've seen that they do struggle to maintain that over the course of the year, and rivals do catch up. With Mercedes, even 2021 is a great outlier for this, in my opinion. Even though Mercedes ultimately lost the Drivers' Championship, and again, we're not going to go down as to how that happened because we know what happened in Abu Dhabi. But at the end of the day, they produced a phenomenal car. Red Bull arguably had the advantage in the first race of the season, and over the course of the year, Mercedes fought tooth and nail with them, and they still produced a car that was good enough to win the Constructors' Championship and dominated the last 4 or 5 races of the season. So, I think Mercedes can, but they have to start on the front foot, or at least in a position where they can develop to a point where they outdevelop Red Bull, like they did in 2022 to a degree, to the point where they could win races. If they did that with an equal car at the start, absolutely they can beat Red Bull.
I think with the Mercedes situation compared to Ferrari, I think first of all there seems to be more optimism at Mercedes. If you like have a look at the quotations from people in Mercedes, there seems to be like an energy, like almost enjoying this challenge, and I feel like they're more likely to come back compared to Ferrari. Like again, as you said, Adam, I think Mercedes have more of a habit of being able to develop a car throughout the season compared to Ferrari. Ferrari do tend to tail off, and I think also with the development strategy that Mercedes are going in with at the beginning of the season, we did hear talk. I think Toto Wolff himself said, if we go into the beginning of the season and this concept we're still running with isn't working, we are going to go into a big spec car. We didn't hear this talk from Ferrari. Ferrari seems to be adamant that if they were just to refine the issues that they had in 2022, they'll be able to challenge Red Bull this season. This obviously isn't happening. So I do feel that Ferrari are doing a lot more head scratching compared to Mercedes, who've already gone, look, it's not working. We're now going on to plan B.
Yeah, I mean, it might be down to the fact that Ferrari are still probably unsure as to what they should do. I think they still feel relatively confident they can get this right with the current car concept, and that it's more down to not so much the concept, but they just haven't exploited the massive gains that they were hoping for. Whereas Mercedes seem quite clear that what they're doing right now isn't working. I think Aston Martin have played a big part in this, in that they've produced such a good car with the means that less means than Ferrari and Mercedes have had available to them, and they're ahead of them right now on the road. So in Mercedes' mind, they're like, that with with our resources and our people and what we've got, we can do much more than what they've done. Ferrari at this point, I think they're just kind of deciding what to do, and at the moment I think they're going to try and do both in some regard and see what's best, but even then that's not really going to help them. They need to be fully invested in one way or the other. So we'll see. Sorry, Lee, I realised I was cutting you off there before you weighed in.
That's all right. No, I do happen to agree with you both that if it's going to be any team to catch Red Bull on the Red Bull concept, be Mercedes, you also have with ATR. That's the whole point. That if it works the way it's supposed to, even if Mercedes finish second year after year, as long as the ceiling isn't met, but even then the ceiling, there's never a solid ceiling. It's all just been good gains become smaller and smaller. But the whole point of the ATR is obviously they give the lower teams to finish. So if Mercedes second, they will be able to bring the fight. Like Red Bull closed that gap to Mercedes up till 21. Red Bull got closer and closer. Then obviously the championship fight in 21. Yes, we got the rule change in 26. So there's obviously less time for that development curve. Ferrari, as you both said, just looks so lost. Mercedes were lost in Bahrain, but they came to Saudi Arabia and like, bam, we know what we're doing. We've got a plan. Bam, we're all happy as Larry. Ferrari lost in Bahrain. They're lost in Saudi Arabia. We probably get to the next Grand Prix in Australia, and they don't even turn up because they got that lost. They missed the whole continent. Or the country, because obviously the continent isn't just Australia, but they're just completely lost, and I feel sorry to see that they're so lost, and they don't. It's just the lack of faith to see them turn it around, and even if they do decide to go down the Red Bull concept, they could easily get lost and go down the wrong way down the Red Bull concept.
Lee, we've been waiting 15 years for Ferrari to turn it around.
Maybe there's a logic here. Maybe there is a plan here where Ferrari are deliberately making themselves look so bad that in Jeddah, for example, they obviously thought, oh, well, we're going to be terrible this year. So they probably thought, right, there's a way in which we can do this, and where we're currently second on the ACR list behind Red Bull. And that means Aston Martin, Mercedes, and everyone else has more time to develop than they do, with the exception of Red Bull, of course. They've obviously realised that this car is terrible. And rather than trying to compete and finish in P2, they've obviously cottoned on to the idea that if they finish P4 by the time we get to July, when the ATR resets itself, they'll have more development time. So they thought to themselves, if we do that, we could have one hell of an opportunity to produce a great car for 2024. And then, of course, we'll see them turn up in 2024, and it's like, well, this didn't work. So we'll see. We'll see. Plan, what plan would it be? Plan A, B, C, D, E, F, A, B, I don't know, whatever Ferrari want to do. We'll go down that one again. Let's move on to another question we got from Lewis George 6344. Interestingly creative username there. Thanks for your question. They've written, they've been a lot of back and forth. I'm messing my words up here. Sorry, I'm reading this terribly, so I'll start this again. There has been a lot of back and forth recently between Lewis and Mercedes regarding the quality of the car and Lewis's future with the team. Is there a shift on the balance of power between Lewis and George already happening regarding who calls the shots with the team? I think there is a little bit, to be honest. I don't know, what do you guys reckon?
I I feel that Mercedes must be in two minds about it. Obviously, Lewis is the multiple championship winner. He has the experience, but at the same time, this is just pure business talk here. They're thinking short term, long term here. If Lewis retires in the next season or so, he's gone. They're probably looking at long term. Obviously, we've been talking so much what's going to happen over the next 3-4 years. You're looking that direction. They are going to look at George. So I suppose there's a real conflict of interest here at Mercedes, and I think they'll be hoping and praying that the relationship between Lewis and George remains amicable, because then they can get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of gamemanship with Lewis and Mercedes. I think Lewis is using what's going on about contract negotiations, holding his time, obviously getting what's best for him. If he wants a multi-year, single year, obviously more money because the driver wants more money. I think there's a lot of internal politics going on at the moment, more than a shift in driver priority.
Yeah, I think so too. As I said, I think there is a shift in the balance of power. I don't think Lewis holds complete control anymore. And, I agree with what you both are saying. I think Lewis's current situation with his contract negotiations and the fact that he is 38 right now, in that if he does sign a new contract, it will most likely be the last one that he does sign in Formula One. And, Mercedes have options. Obviously, Sir Lewis Hamilton is irreplaceable. You can't find another one of him right now. The only driver you could arguably chuck in that car and expect the same level of performance and output week in, week out is Max Verstappen. And that's not going to happen. We can debate that all we want. We know Max is not going to join Mercedes anytime soon. He'll probably stay at Red Bull for his entire career. There's no reason to leave. So Mercedes know right now, given the current hierarchy in Formula One, that the only realistic option that Sir Lewis Hamilton has in terms of joining another team and winning a world championship would feasibly be Red Bull. But we know that's not realistic. Red Bull wouldn't sign him unless Max left, and can't see that happening at all. So Lewis's options are quite limited. And when you talk about the future at Mercedes, Sir Lewis might have 3 or 4 years left in him at the most, or however long he wants to keep going. But George Russell is going to be there for over a decade in his F1 career. He's only just beginning to make waves in his F1 career. And I think we've seen in this race, we saw a little bit of it in Bahrain. We might have seen it a few times last season. George Russell is quite prepared to call the shots on his own driving when he needs to and how his performance is going in the race to his benefit. We saw this in Zandvoort when he called the shots on strategy, which got him ahead of Lewis. We saw this in Brazil when he put the performance together and what he was doing there. We saw in Jeddah the whole thing about, let Lewis through because he's on better tyres, and George said no, and then he upped his pace and stuff like that. And Lewis himself, he said after the race, if he had George's setup, he probably could have been in a better position in the race. So, rumours were saying that there was a 50-50 choice on what setup concept to go down, and Lewis went one way, George went the other, and George won out in the end. I do feel, and I said this before, and I think this is going to happen the more and more it goes on, that Mercedes' focus on who they want to back going forward is going to shift more and more towards George Russell. Not necessarily in his favour, it might be more closer to 50-50, but George will get a lot more attention from Mercedes than he would have expected a year or two ago if he was there when Lewis was obviously running the show. So it is quite interesting. How Lewis will deal with that, I'm not sure. I don't think outside Red Bull there are any realistic options. I mean, he could consider Aston Martin in a few years' time, but that assumes he's going to stick around and then want to be in Aston Martin if Fernando Alonso is still there. Does Lawrence Stroll want to rekindle that fiery relationship again like we saw in 2007 with McLaren? Probably not. Will he kick his own son out of the team to accommodate Lewis? I don't know. Probably not. So Ferrari's not realistic either, because Ferrari are in the same boat, if not worse than Mercedes right now. And why would Lewis want to go there to win a world championship unless Ferrari produce something spectacular? And even then, they're going to be back in Charles Leclerc as their future. So I think Lewis is right to call this out, but I do feel that Mercedes' stance on this, and even Toto Wolff, when he said, not to go on too long, but Toto Wolff was saying if Lewis doesn't feel he can win a world championship here, he does need to look at his options to try and win a world championship because that's what matters to him. So I do feel Mercedes' stance on this is that we obviously want Lewis to do well here, but he's no longer the driver that is going to be the driver we back for the next 5-10 years. He's not that guy anymore. So, yeah, I do think there is a shift going on between the two of them. Sorry, I know I went on for a bit on that one. Let's move on to another question. Quick one on Ferrari from Forza Leclerc, and they asked, how much longer do you expect Charles Leclerc to put up with Ferrari's woes and poor reliability and just a shambolic cars, really? That's the gist of it. I mean, his current contract, when is that up? 2025? Something like that?
Sounds about right.
Unless he's got a clause for performance.
Yeah, I don't think he probably does, given the contract he was given at Ferrari, but I'm of the opinion with Leclerc that his contract conveniently goes into that period when it expires, that there will be options available, possibly at maybe Red Bull, Aston Martin, Mercedes, and anyone else really that might be in the fight at that point. Yeah, Audi as well. We shouldn't forget them when they come into the sport. I expect Leclerc to see out his current contract. If Ferrari don't give him indications that he could potentially be fighting for a world championship by then, and I mean across the whole season, not just half of one like we got last year, I would not be surprised if he decided to make that difficult decision and leave the team to go somewhere where he will win a world championship, because a driver of his talent should not have to put up with what he's putting up with right now. I mean, he's not even getting a fair chance. It doesn't matter what he does right now.
Yeah, I think barring 2022, he's almost been wasted at Ferrari. I feel it's a really tough one because at the moment we only have like one team really dominating, and there's no sign of, I suppose, apart from Aston Martin. But, we're talking about the options being limited for Lewis. I feel the options are also limited for Charles Leclerc. I feel there'd be a domino effect if Lewis was to retire. Maybe Mercedes would be the place for him to go to. But yeah, it's a tough one, but I feel it would be at Ferrari for the next couple of years at least, purely down to the lack of top drivers we expect to be available.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, Courtney. I think it's very limited, and it's just Mercedes. If Lewis retires, and that's a complete unknown. Beyond that, he's going to suffer it out.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about Mercedes. There had been a lot of rumours saying that there was a potential for a Hamilton-Leclerc swap between Ferrari and Mercedes. I just can't see why Ferrari would do that. Don't get me wrong, Sir Lewis Hamilton is still a better driver than Charles Leclerc. That is fine, but the same argument with George Russell, and Leclerc's obviously a lot further along in that discussion than Russell is, with all due respect. Leclerc's the future for the next 5-10 years of any team that wants him, that can provide him the tools to try and win a world championship. Ideally, that would be at Ferrari, but I'm sure other teams will be keeping an eye on that as well. And the situation, whereas Lewis Hamilton, he's good for the next few years or however long he wants to stay in the sport. I can't see him being in F1 in 5 years' time. I can't see Fernando Alonso. Actually, no, I can see Fernando Alonso being in F1 in 5 years' time. But I can't see Lewis doing that. I'm surprised that Sir Lewis is still in F1 today. I fully expected him to give up the ghost. If he'd have won an eighth world title in 2021, I wouldn't have been surprised if he'd have called it a day then and there. I think that is the one thing that is keeping him in the sport. And despite last year, he did say a lot that he was enjoying this and enjoying that. I think it's clear as day the one thing keeping him in F1 right now is the desire for an 8th world title, if that is realistic. It will come to a point where he will just say, you know what, forget it. I don't need it. So, yeah, with Ferrari, I think it's going to be critical to keep Leclerc. So they're going to have to do what they can to keep him. Another one on Ferrari quickly. Just make sure I got this right, who wrote this question in. Michael Body. Thanks, Michael, for your question. He wrote to us and said, I'm a little bit concerned about Carlos Sainz's form. It's something that's kind of gone under the radar in the opening few races and a lot of 2022, given Ferrari's reliability issues and woeful performances. Are you concerned that Carlos Sainz right now has either regressed or is underperforming at Ferrari to a point where Ferrari might even consider if he is a good driver for them going forward? What do you guys reckon? Because you guys were big Sainz supporters over the last few years, so you might be better equipped to answer this than me on this one. But are you concerned by Sainz's form at the moment?
I feel that his form hasn't been great lately, but the fact that Ferrari are performing so miserably at the moment will save Carlos Sainz some time. If Ferrari were competing for a championship and Carlos Sainz made some high profile errors that cost them in those big moments, he'd definitely be under the cosh a lot more. If Ferrari become more reliant on Sainz throughout this season and he messes up for them, then yes, I reckon he will be in trouble. But yeah, I feel that the situation that Ferrari are currently in might save them a bit more time.
Maybe. Lee, what do you reckon?
I got to start off with that. He hasn't been probably the best of what he probably could deliver, but he's still the leading Ferrari driver in the championship. Carlos is known to provide better technical feedback than Charles, which obviously if the Ferrari is struggling with their car, they want the technical feedback. So although he may not deliver the speed, if he's delivering the technical feedback to help develop the car more than Charles, he may not bring back the points, but he's doing more than Charles in that aspect to build a better car. So I don't think it's a simple, clear cut that his speed may not be up to, well, he's not delivering the performance that is expected from him being a Ferrari driver. But at the moment, he's still the lead Ferrari driver. He outscored Charles in 21. So there is every aspect to say that he's not threatened yet of being exposure, but you never know in Ferrari. Ferrari can self-implode and they just fire everybody, and they hire Daniel Ricciardo and I don't even know Grosjean. There, it's the driver just came to my head, and just there we go. That's it. We just go with it, and it's all the driver's fault. So it's Ferrari are just a big unknown mess at the moment, and it's until they sort themselves out. Yeah, as Courtney said, they can't accuse Carlos or anything else.
Yeah, that is true. I think with all that going on, it doesn't really matter what the drivers do. I mean, Leclerc is driving out of his skin right now in that Ferrari, and it's still not enough. And I admit I'm concerned about Sainz's form as well, quite frankly. I do feel over the last 12 months, Sainz's performances have not been anywhere near as good as what we saw in 2021 when he joined the team. I thought he was brilliant that year. And the one thing about Carlos is that he was consistent and he was very, very quick. Right now, he's neither of those things. I don't think he's doing really badly, but I think you look at 2022 and how he struggled to adapt with the new car. This coincided, unfortunately, with the period where Ferrari were the best on the grid and they had the best car and leading both world championships. And a lot of that was down to Charles Leclerc. You go to Silverstone, even though Carlos Sainz won that race, and you could argue he definitely deserved to win that race, there's another fair argument to be made that if Charles Leclerc wasn't ruined by the strategy Ferrari had given him and Carlos didn't say, like, stop inventing and not follow their instructions, Leclerc would have won that race. So he has had that deficit to Leclerc in that time. And I think in Jeddah, what was it? It was half a second in qualifying between the two of them. I know Carlos didn't have a great second lap, but Leclerc didn't even, there shouldn't be half a second between the two. Not even close. So I am a little bit concerned. I do think Carlos has time to turn it around, and I'm sure he will. I think he's a very capable driver. But even though Ferrari don't like to list their drivers as 1 and 2, there is a clear number 1 at Ferrari and a clear number 2 right now. And Carlos is not driving well enough to be considered a number 1 compared to Leclerc. And there are options on the grid. Even though Ferrari are doing badly right now, I'm pretty certain that there are a lot of drivers on that grid right now that would love the opportunity to drive a Ferrari, and I'm sure Ferrari...
Lando Norris, perhaps.
Maybe. I mean, he's having a dismal time at McLaren as it is. I don't think having a dismal time at Ferrari is that much worse. So at least the car's faster when it finishes. So yeah, I think there are options out there. Speaking of Lando, we should move on to the next one. From Lando, my Lando. And that's a bit of a pun on Captain, my Captain there. If Lando Norris decides to leave McLaren, which team do you think he should join? I'm going to start off and say Mercedes. quite frankly. I think him and George Russell will be an excellent partnership.
Yeah, no, I completely agree there. And there's talks of him joining Red Bull. Red Bull would be a good move for him because we know that Max is the number one driver there. If not Mercedes, I agree Mercedes would be a good move for him. But I think going to a new project like an Audi perhaps would be good for him. Build a team around Lando, because even though obviously at McLaren he's still probably considered the number one driver at this point, it might be good for him to sort of leave home, because he's been at McLaren since he was a kid. Might be good for him to leave home, build a team around him, and actually help him develop more as a driver. So I agree, either Mercedes or go to a whole new project.
What do you reckon, Lee?
I completely agree, Courtney. I think it's all going to be down on Lewis. If Lewis stays in the sport, if Lewis leaves, then Mercedes definitely. If Lewis signs on a multi-year contract, Audi, you have obviously Andrew Seidel being the CEO of the Audi project, got their relationship from being the team principal at McLaren. Get in there, build that team, and you look at right. I'm just going to set up a hypothetical situation that Charles decides to leave Ferrari at 2025 because Ferrari's a complete and utter mess. Still, you have a Lando or a Charles combination at Audi come in with two good experienced drivers. Bam, there you go. They're potentially in a championship fight. Obviously, I don't expect that, but Audi are going to be wanting good quality drivers. So, and I'm sure Lando's on that shopping list.
Yeah, I do think Lando Norris in particular is the driver that all the big teams are keeping an eye on right now. He has that luxurious position where you could place a fair argument for him joining almost any of them. I mean, and you can include Aston Martin in this argument as well as they're progressing forward, because they will need to look at their options in a few years' time. I don't want to wait until 2026 to see Lando Norris in a car that's capable of winning a world championship, and it would be lovely if that was at McLaren, but a lot has got to happen at McLaren to make that a reality, quite frankly.
Just want to make a little point. Look, I'm a massive Lando Norris fan, but I know there's only one race, but if Oscar Piastri starts to outperform Lando, it might start limiting the options that he has, because he wouldn't be seen as desirable if he gets outperformed by Oscar.
Well, this is it, and it might expedite that situation where Lando's like, I've got to find an opportunity sooner rather than later. And Lando's contract, is it till 2024? I can't remember if it's...
It was a long one. He signed a long-term contract.
Yeah, they said it was a multi-year deal. They never specified how long exactly, but I did hear rumours it was around till 2024. Maybe 2025 would seem more logical if it was. Yeah, I don't want to wait for Lando to be in a good car in 2026, wherever that may be. I think certain dominoes will have to fall for an opportunity to present itself to him, but may have to keep an eye on that. Red Bull would be a great one. I agree, probably not the smartest one considering what he'd have to topple, but given the drivers that have been in that car and what they've been up against, there's probably no driver better to go into that team and try to challenge Max and what he's built there than probably Lando Norris, really. He has got that level of feel and ability that could allow him to cope with the philosophy that Red Bull go down, which will be one that will help Max. It's always been that way. So
a shock scenario is we always hear about these things from Marco about Max will take an early retirement. He won't be around for long, etc., etc. Shock retirement into 25, Lando to Red Bull, bam. That's
a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see Max going before. I get it, I agree, but I can't see Max going before his contract runs out. And look, if Max is as dominant as we fear he may be, I could easily see Max wanting to clean up on the records in the same way that Sir Lewis has over the years, and then go after he's done it. You know, he's got that mentality about him. Yeah. It could do, but I mean, as I said, you never say never. We never thought Nico Rosberg would retire from F1 a few days after winning the World Championship. Shocked everybody, but you know that can happen sometimes. Got a couple more questions to go. Just being mindful of time here. We're not able to do all these questions, guys, so we'll do another episode in the future if you've enjoyed this. But let us know what your thoughts on these questions. Let us know your thought on the episode. Would you like to see us do more of these over the course of the season? Another one on McLaren from McLaren 481. I believe that's Norris's and Piastri's number, so not quite nice there. Do you think Oscar Piastri is already regretting snubbing Alpine for McLaren? Interesting one, maybe. What do you guys reckon?
I I'm not sure because he obviously had his personal reasons for leaving Alpine. Maybe he didn't feel appreciated there. Maybe he didn't feel he had a long-term future there. And I feel sometimes when young drivers go into a team that struggles, the way I was talking about Carlos Sainz, the spotlight isn't as much on them, so it gives them the chance to settle down into the sport. Because let's think about it. People were raving on about Oscar Piastri for, getting past Logan Sargent. No disrespect to Logan Sargent, but that's the level where McLaren are at the moment. So there's much less pressure on the younger drivers when they're in, a team that's struggling. Whereas if you feel he went to Alpine, who have higher expectations, and he will have had, let's not forget, he'll have had Esteban Ocon as a teammate. We all know that Esteban isn't the easiest driver to get on with when you're his teammate. So he'd probably have a much easier time at McLaren, even though the performance isn't quite there at the moment.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think it's too early to even consider, not that I believe that he actually is regretting snubbing Alpine. There are a lot of reasons for how that move manifested, mostly on Alpine's part, where they didn't honour certain contract clauses that were given to him in terms of giving him a couple of runs in FP1 sessions in the car from last year, and also helping him get a team lined up for 2022. They did 2023. Sorry, they did neither within the deadline. So, that ended the way it did. I think, as well as that, and the personal reasons as why he went to McLaren, I think ultimately he joined McLaren because he obviously feels that McLaren are able to provide him with a better platform and a better opportunity to progress in the sport than what Alpine would have done. And bear in mind, this is a guy that had been with the Alpine program for many years, and he obviously thought he was going to get a seat in 2022, and after he won the F2 championship, that never happened. And Alpine does not have the best track record of bringing drivers through from their academy into the team. Or the Renault Academy, if you like. When was the last time a Renault Academy driver got into F1 through the academy? I'm trying to think.
Grosjean?
Possibly. Did Grosjean?
What about Jolyon Palmer?
Well, there you go. Jolyon Palmer.
Yeah.
Great pundit, but, that's not exactly an answer that would say, oh, wow, that's I've definitely got to go there and go to that team, especially when you see like what Mercedes have brought through, Red Bull, obviously the Masters are doing this, Ferrari have probably, brought a few over the years. They brought Leclerc in, and obviously that did pretty well for them. So, yeah, I don't think Piastri is regretting it at all, at least right now. It's easy to say it when McLaren are performing the way they are, but if they produce that new car when it's coming and it starts to be brilliant, then the narrative quickly changes on that one. Let's do one more question from David Stevens. Again, another McLaren one. So some of the questions related to other teams we'll have to do in a future episode. At what point do we start acknowledging that McLaren were as much to blame for Ricciardo's poor form with the team as he was? That's a good question to end on, I think. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Now,
I think... you don't
know?
No, I was going to say now he's already... saying that how bad McLaren are doing because they went the wrong way, which means they were partly the wrong way last year. And you got to think Daniel was rubbing his hands with glee that he got paid large sums of money to walk away from the horrible car that Oscar and Lando are stuck with. So he's sitting there comfortably. I think more fault was the McLaren than Daniel at all. I still think he's the honey badger, and he's just waiting for that golden pot, or whatever analogy you want to use for a honey badger, to go and get a seat back on the grid.
Well, he got that big payout to leave the team early. He won their last race, their first race win in almost a decade. So, those were the highlights of McLaren. But I have argued this. Daniel Ricciardo, they always say that cliche with Daniel Ricciardo last year. How often would we hear that Ricciardo doesn't forget how to drive a Formula One car fast? And yet, how many times last season did Daniel Ricciardo really get on terms with his teammate? Hardly ever. In 2021, that was the same story. There was a time when people were saying after, I think it was Monaco, that he shouldn't be in that car, and then he wins at Monza, and he was very good that weekend as well. And, on top of all of that, we've seen what McLaren have produced this year. We saw what they produced in 2022. Ever since 2012, there have been different problems with McLaren in terms of their car design or the concept, and drivers struggling, whether it be Button, Magnussen, Perez, Alonso, Van Dorn, Ricciardo, now the latest victim, if you like. Norris the exception, because Norris has proven to be an outstanding driver and has come off really well. Well, yeah, sorry, I almost forgot Carlos Sainz. So Carlos Sainz did well. Yeah, he did very well at McLaren. Yeah. You know, so we have to acknowledge him as well in that one. We have to talk him up on that. But I just feel that over the years, no matter what drivers they've had in that car, there's been issues with the car, and they blame the Honda engines, they blame the Renault engines, and it's like, how many more excuses do you guys want to give? And I feel like McLaren have sadly regressed to becoming a midfield team. And I think the sooner they accept that and look at how to progress forward, rather than still acting like they are one of the big teams in F1, the paradigm has shifted now. Your Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, you're in that elite status. Aston Martin are obviously moving on up. But then everybody below that, all in the midfield. There's nothing wrong with that. But you do get to a point where, you know, the facilities are great, but McLaren obviously trying to improve on those. I'm not going to judge the caliber of staff because they're all fantastic at what they do. And, you know, everybody's brilliant at what they do in F1. So I'm not going to go there on that one. The drivers are very, very good. Both great young potential there. Norris has obviously proven that he is going to be an elite driver one day, if he isn't already. Piastri certainly has the tools to do that as well. It gets to a point where you have to question what McLaren are doing and how much of that affected Ricciardo in years gone by. They had a driver like Norris that was so good at driving around issues with the car, particularly at the slow corners. Ricciardo struggled massively with that. Mm-hmm. They had 2 years and they never really fixed that problem for Ricciardo. And for me, I'm not going to sit there and say Ricciardo was phenomenal, McLaren were terrible, but I do feel that there is some scope to suggest that McLaren were very, very quick to throw the blame at Ricciardo. But the reality was, I don't think Ricciardo was completely at fault. I think McLaren should share as much of the blame as he did for his poor form. I don't think that's unfair.
Yeah, but it seems pretty clear now that McLaren didn't develop a car that suited Daniel Ricciardo's driving style. Because we saw, obviously, during Daniel's time at Renault, he did a great job there as well. You know, there could have been that easy thing to say, oh, you know, he only did well at Red Bull because Adrian Newey, you know, developed masterpieces. Even though they didn't have the engine power, he still developed fantastic cars, so it would have made them easier to drive. But he went to Renault, midfield team, did a great job with them, got them podiums. Let's not forget, he was getting this Renault team podium. So there's clearly the way they were developing that car didn't suit Daniel, which probably is Daniel's biggest weakness. Obviously, Lando Norris is much better at adapting to different driving styles, whereas Daniel seems to have very much like a sweet spot, very similar to Sebastian Vettel. If you have a look at Sebastian Vettel, he had that sweet spot. If you got that sweet spot, it was unbeatable. Other than that, not quite on that top level. Yeah. So maybe that was the problem at McLaren.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Ricciardo fell foul to what happened with Vettel and obviously what happened with Kimi Räikkönen to a degree as well. Like if it's not to the if it's not to the degree or to the specs of what you want, it's going to be hard to get the best out of it. There are only a few drivers that can drive their way around a difficult car. Those three were all great drivers, world champions, 2 of them, and race winners, but they weren't great at driving around a car's problems. Lando Norris is the opposite. I think he's phenomenal at doing that. Oscar Piastri, it's too early to tell, but a lot of people that know him well and know what he's like as a driver would probably argue that he is cut from that same cloth as Norris is. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see on that one, but I do feel that McLaren could have done more to accommodate for Ricciardo's issues. They didn't even build a car that was suitable for Norris. And they haven't this year either. So, you know, what they're going to do if the car's terrible when they bring the upgrades in Baku? They're going to blame Norris? They're going to blame Piastri? I think they're just run out of excuses now. Yeah. And I think they just have to accept that they need to do more and perhaps facilitate to their drivers and see where it goes there. As I said, this is just a fan saying this. So, you know, what do I know? Lee, let's hear from you on this one before we sort of round off on this one, because I think Courtney and I kind of dominated this particular question.
No, I think I completely agree with both of you. I think part of it can be blamed at McLaren. You should be blaming it now, and it's not There's an all complete Daniel. It's a shame that there's that culture. We say we got the blame culture in Ferrari that they point fingers and fire. There is actually a similar culture in McLaren, right? They're not firing people, but there's very much a blame culture, as you already alluded to, with the engines being the GP2 engine, the Renault engine. Daniel's fault. It's never our fault, and you think you compare it to like Mercedes, and say like in Bahrain, this has not gone what we wanted. They didn't blame the drivers. They looked to themselves, looked at the data, and go, actually, it's us. We're the fault, or not the obviously team, but as overall, we've gone wrong. Let's plan. Where McLaren have gone, oh, it's Daniel's fault. Let's get rid of him. The car's rubbish. Oh, that's inconvenient. Oh, we're building a new car in as before as we go on. It's fine. Well, that car could still be rubbish, but let's wait and see. It's I think McLaren have lost their way from their championship winning days, and they need to find a way to restore that and not just be blaming left, right, and centre.
Well, I think there has to be acceptance from them that they, as much as they would like to be, they are not what they used to be. I mean, how often do we see Mika Hakkinen running around it? I mean, he was there at Jeddah last weekend, and that's a stark reminder to me of the last time before, Hamilton Alonso was running around, that McLaren were considered a regular dominant team in F1. Certainly where they want to be, I have the absolute confidence that they can do it. But I think the first step of dealing with a problem is acknowledging that there is one. And right now, I feel like McLaren haven't done that for a long time.
I think McLaren need to look at their old rivals, Williams, to see what can happen if you don't accept the situation.
Yeah, I think it's more likely right now that if they don't do that, they will regress into that territory than they will get back to the likes of Ferrari, a team that they would want to be competing with. I mean, Ferrari, you can joke about them as much as you want. And yes, they have a lot more resource available to them than McLaren do. That's not... get our lines tied about that one. But Ferrari do acknowledge where there are issues. And even if you don't like the blame culture, you can't blame them for at least trying to eradicate these issues. And more often than not, they do seem to find some resolutions. Doesn't warrant a championship, but at least it gets them back in the conversation. Whereas McLaren, they make progress, and they have done, but they've kind of stagnated into that part. And we have to appreciate that next step up is very, very difficult. But it is possible. Aston Martin are doing it. They've revamped everything, and it could prove to be brilliant for them. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. I think we should round it up there. We have been going on for a while now. So thank you so much, guys, for all of your questions. We really appreciate it. I think it's been quite fun. I've enjoyed this. It's something to break up our normal race reviews and previews and other episodes that we do. So if you have enjoyed it, guys, we will do other episodes of this in the future. I appreciate... We've only focused really on half the grid. So we do need to get and do more questions based on some of the other teams in the paddock, but I think we'll do that in future episodes. But if you have enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you are new. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting platform. As we did earlier, we gave Dave a shout out. We can give you a shout out for your brilliant support as well. And all that's left to say, guys, is thanks for tuning in. Please stay safe. We will be back next week for the Australian Grand Prix preview. And until then, take care, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.
See you soon.
Goodbye.